Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first keynote lecture event in our GCC keynote lecture series this winter semester. And a welcome, obviously, also to our new doctoral members of our center who just started last week. And a very warm welcome to our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Viktor Pál from the University of Ostrava in Czechia, who is going to share part of his work with us tonight on environmental history, consumerism, and trash in communist Eastern Europe. We are very glad that tonight's event has been again conceptualized in collaboration with our esteemed colleagues from JLU's Colloquium Eastern European History. A very warm welcome to all of you, and particularly to Dr. Gleb Kazakov, who will be joining me in a second and to elaborate a little bit further on the context of the invitation. But before I hand over to him, I would just like to make a note regarding the format of tonight's event. Directly after the lecture, we invite questions and comments from all of you in the audience, online and offline. And for those of you who are joining us online during the Q&A, if you would like to pose a question or make a comment, please just enter a plus in the chat and we'll be happy to add you to the list. However, if you prefer to, you may also just write your question or comment directly in the chat and we'll be happy to read it out for you. I should mention that tonight's event will be recorded. The recording, however, as always, is limited to the audio and video of the presenters. The recording does not include any of the Q&A session afterwards, neither does it include any chat activity or any metadata regarding the participants in the session. So please join me in welcoming Professor Viktor Pál and Gleb Kazakov, who is going to share some words of introduction. Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. So I'm Gleb Kazakov, and I have the honor to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Viktor Pál, and whom I had the pleasure to invite to the University of Giessen. And I'm also I'm glad to see that with this keynote lecture, first in this fall, we actually continue in a well-established tradition of collaboration between the Graduate School for the Study of Culture and the Department of East European History, and also a tradition probably established last semester in the spring, that we have also a keynote lecture dedicated to the environmental history. And these two topics, environmental history and history of Eastern Europe, are exactly bread and butter of research done by our guest Viktor Pál. But also, if you have to choose a third keyword to describe the research academic career of Viktor Pál, that would be academic mobility and internationalization, because he first studied his graduate studies back in Hungary at the University of Miskolc, where he graduated in 2004, and then he moved to Finland, where he finished his PhD studies in 2015. And in this PhD project was then converted into a book, his first monograph, titled Technology and Environment in State Socialist Hungary, An Economic History, which was published in 2017 by Paldroff Macmillan. From 2018 to 2021, he was heading a research project under the title Pour Me a Cold One, a Cold War History of Beverage Containers, founded by Cone Foundation. After this, since, if I'm not mistaken, last year, 2024, he is now an associate professor, has a position of associate professor at the University of Ostrava in Czech Republic. And this year, where he finished his habilitation process at this university. His current project, he actually leads even a couple of projects, but the biggest one is dedicated to environmental history of transboundary rivers in Cold War East Central Europe, founded by Czech Science Foundation. And of course, Viktor Pál published a significant number of articles and publications in a wide range of international journals. I just mentioned some of them: Journal of Environmental and History, Environmental History, Ab Imperio, a Journal of Contemporary History, and Agricultural History. He edited several collective volumes dedicated to the question of environmental history and consumerism and recycle and trash and Central East Europe, and also in a global context. And, well, another important piece of information for people gathered here, probably something which might make you raise eyebrow in suspense and excitement, that Viktor Pál, together with American historian Stephen Brain, founded last year, 2024, a new book series titled Environmental History of Eastern and Central Europe, which is situated at the Central European University Press. And this book series, it's a new book series, so the editors are looking for new ideas, for new book manuscript proposals, especially from young, promising PhD candidates. So maybe it's some information would be interesting for some of you here. Without further, so as you see, environmental history and Eastern Europe are entangled, intertwined in the research profile of Viktor Pál, and I'm very excited to listen to his keynote talk, where he will speak not just about the environmental issues, but also about the consumerism and consumer behavior in the communist East Bloc during the Cold War. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Viktor Pál to the podium, and we're all excited about insights he will give us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is great. Such a pity my family is not here. They usually don't believe me when I talk about my work. They think I'm just like wasting time in the office and drinking fancy coffee with my dear colleagues. Thank you very much for this kind invitation and the lovely time in Giessen. I tried to visit the botanical gardens today, and today is the first day that they were closed for the winter, and I took this as a sign. I would like to come back and see the botanical gardens, so I really hope that will come true one day. These are the planned contents for today. First, I would like to talk a little bit about environmental history, because I don't know how much you know about environmental history, and I just want to set the tone. Probably for some of you this will be very boring, but I will try to spice it up with some personal insights so that you don't have to fall asleep. And then I would like to a little bit talk about the first and second waves of environmentalism to situate what I want to talk about in Eastern Europe, East Central Europe, specifically in Hungary. That has been my hobby horse for several years. And so that is something in between these two waves. And then specifically consumption and waste streams in socialist East Central Europe, the topic of today's talk. It will take some time while we get there, but I hope the time will not be wasted. Before we start, I find this is one of, I wouldn't say one of my favorite quotes, but it's one of the quotes that I like using. It's an old school quote from the 70s, I believe. So take it with a pinch of salt, okay? This was formulated in a different time period when people thought about things in a different way. But I find the truth, the core of this statement, something of a mission statement when it comes to environmental history. It's really not the wilderness, and we can debate about what wilderness is and is there is wilderness, and that's not the point here. The point is that it's not the wilderness that needs management. It has been doing quite well after all for a couple of billion years. People, and I find it very telling, because this is the experience that I have in my work for 20 odd years, and this is what is driving our work for many of us in environmental history. It is a story that is driven by the interconnectivity between the human and the non-human, and I think this is the key innovative feature of environmental histories, that it studies the relationship between humans and the natural environment in the past. It acknowledges the agency of non-human actors. Those can be animal species, plant species, natural phenomena, rivers, weather, wind, you name it. And environmental history takes the human out of the center of its observation and replaces it with the interconnectivity of the human and the non-human. I love this dichotomy. It makes the story very intriguing and exciting, and luckily, I have been waiting for this for some decades, but luckily it seems to be that there is more and more individuals who are interested in this story these days, at least more than in the 2000s, it seems. However, environmental history, for many of us, we thought that environmental history is new to Eastern Europe. But recently, I realized that there is this guy, Milan Miška in Czech, who is the founding person of the department, the very unit where I work at. A dissident who was barred from academia for decades. This person investigated the environmental history. You have the German translation right there. The environmental history of the Austral region in the 1980s. So this particular publication was published in the 1980s when he could already publish his work. He was barred from practice between 1968 for political reasons until the mid-80s. And this is one of the first articles that he could publish. And this was an eye-opening experience for me to read this article and to understand that what I thought was very new, what I thought that is something new that we are bringing into East Central Europe, it has been there for decades. But there are some new experiences as well. What we are trying to do in Ostrava, we are trying to build up a sort of interdisciplinary hub, something that you have also here. I met many individuals from different disciplines today, and it has been a wonderful experience at the workshop. Social scientists, humanists working together and benefiting each other's work. This is great, and this is something we were trying to do in the specific Czech context. That's a little bit challenging. Well, little bit means it's very challenging, and there is a strong thinking of silos and strong thinking of disciplines, but we are trying to push forward both with our local anchors and also with the international cohort. So we have a number of activities that are going on, and we also have a strong line in developing teaching based on the research that we are doing. So this is an ongoing process that I hope it will be fruitful in a few years. But back to the topic of the talk. First, I would like to introduce you to the first wave of environmentalism in the 1800s in Eastern Europe. These actions were characterized first, the action was river regulations, deforestation, urbanization, landscape change, species loss, changing climate, very similar things what we can observe today. And the reaction was also very similar. You can go probably to any regional archive in Germany, hit up materials from the mid-19th century, or read local magazines or journals from the 19th century, and what you will see is accounts not only reflecting on environmental change in the German lands, but also reflecting environmental change globally. People, readers, authors of these accounts were concerned about deforestation in Brazil, soil loss in North America, and so forth. The world opens up at that time, and there is communication between continents, and there is engagement with the action. That is the very rapid alternation of the environment. Something similar happens in East Central Europe. I'm using this map as a laboratory. So this is Hungary, the Pannonian Basin. I'm using this as an example because it's sort of like a perfect example for altering a landscape. This is the 1300s. On the right side, you see it's a massive floodplain. About 30% of the floodplain, that's about 100,000 square kilometers, flooded seasonally. And you see that today it looks starkly different. The two major rivers and other rivers as well are being regulated. They are flowing as straight as possible to facilitate navigation, water flow, and also seasonal floods. And then the rest of the area is not floodplains anymore because the rivers are being regulated by the levees, and the levees are stopping the water to enter the floodplains, but they're massive monocultures. It's like a little bit like United States, but in smaller scale. It's like a mini Iowa. It's the size of Iowa, actually. It's probably the size of Iowa. And massive monocultures in the 19th century. And these river regulations, they were also facilitated by a small group of individuals, the economic, scientific, and intellectual elite of the country. So this is the main tool that they were using. Probably it's very same. You could hit up books on the Rhine, And you could find very similar drawings about the Rhine, how the Rhine was straightened up to be a perfect river course for commerce, transportation, and also for irrigation, and also for directing the floods down to the sea. Cutting the curve, then blocking, making the old riverbed a lake, and then straightening the river to facilitate river flow. However, what you see is a stark reaction of the non-human. These levees are often designed in a way that they are not very effectively delivering the promise that they promised, and then there's massive destruction. This is a city. Maybe you are familiar with the famous salami that's from there. So it's the city of the salami, the Hungarian salami and paprika. And as you see in 1879, much of the city was destroyed by devastating floods. Much of the residents suffered losses and also many deaths. And this is also one of the key events when discussion is being mobilized about the environment and how deforestation upstream is affecting floods and river flow downstream. It's a different story. The bottom line here is that something very significant happens in the plains and also upstream, and it changes the ecosystems in this laboratory that we are looking at. Another side effect is desertification. So the rivers are in the riverbed, and then they are not able to irrigate naturally much of the floodplains. And there is ingenious solutions of irrigation, so building irrigation canals that offers a solution for the problem. And then the result is secondary salinization. These are decades, so we are like long-term changes. Secondary salinization and a further alternation of the landscape. So Hungary is now, or the plains in Hungary, they are some of the most sodic landscapes in Europe. A perfect laboratory how human action and focusing on a very narrow set of priorities for economy, politics, and infrastructure construction impacts the landscape and ecosystems in a way that is very undesirable for outside of that small bubble, a small group of actors, stakeholders who are in this process. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. I cannot spend more time here, but this is the first wave, and so many things are happening in the 19th century. And then the second wave, we identified usually with the 1960s and 70s, that unfolded mostly in the United States and Europe, Western Europe. Marked by activism, social movements, formation of radical environmental activism, and in this context, sociology and other sciences, historical sciences as well, pointed out that Eastern Europe was a recipient of knowledge from the West. Eastern European and civic activists, they were collaborating with Western activists, but although it was a two-way street, it was more like receiving know-how and information how to be organized in the East. This is the state of the art in that sense. This movement, especially for environmental history, has been characterized by this lovely book. I think it is the birth moment of environmental history in many ways. The tone of the writing comes directly from Rachel Carson. And it also symbolizes how the second wave of environmentalism positioned the human and the non-human in an intertwined context. So here is a quote I'd like to read for you to understand the emotionally driven language and mindset that may ring a bell with today's activism when it comes to the environment. So this is from Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. There was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? Many people spoke of them, puzzled and disturbed. The feeding stations in the backyards were deserted. The few birds seen anywhere were moribund. They trembled violently and could not fly. It was a spring without voices. In the mornings that had once frothed with the dawn, of course, of robins, catbirds, doves, shells, wrens and scores of other bird voices, there is now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and the woods and the marsh. So you see the text is very much connected with perception, with observation, with seeing, with the sensory experience of the human, but the human is not taken out from this context. The human is not controlling this situation. The humans are creating a situation that they are embedded with other species as well. So first, second wave of environmentalism. And what's going on in Eastern Europe, right? It's a little bit of an oddball in this context. When it comes to Eastern Europe, usually science has been using images like this, the Chernobyl disaster, identifying the environmental conditions in the socialist bloc, rightly so, with the hotspots. So Chernobyl disaster is a fantastic symbolic event in the 1980s that symbolized how the Soviet Union was collapsing and how it didn't deliver on the promise it promised to the peoples of the Soviet Empire. But in East Central Europe, there are other projects like this, Gabčíkovo na Maros, a brotherly project of Czechoslovakia and Hungary, another mega project that was never finalized and also provoked critical responses, sort of like the second wave of environmentalism in Hungary. So this is visible, this has been visible for the scientific community. This is very much part of the state of the art and the consensus. And John Robert McNeill, who is a very important environmental historian, this book might be translated into German, but his previous book is definitely translated into German. It's Something New Under the Sun. It has been translated to a dozen languages, I believe, summarizes the consensus very, very well. Here it goes. Socialist regimes took the correction of nature's mistakes as a duty and put environmental protection near the bottom on their list of priorities. Ideology had much to do with it. Socialist orthodoxy simply defined environmental degradation as a capitalist problem. Pollution occurred under capitalism because profit-maximizing firms foisted their pollution in society as a way to save costs. Soviet theorists maintained that pollution could not exist under socialism. Okay, fine, fair enough. However, in the past 20 years, there has been some impulses, and the first came from sociology, very interesting. Hungarian sociologist who works in the United States, Zsuzsa Gille, who suggested, and it was a sociological case study on a waste dump somewhere near Pécs, that the collapse of communism did not improve overall environmental conditions universally, because in Zsuzsa's case study, what she saw that the waste dump was privatized and conditions even worsened. There was even less funding to deal with that manufactured waste that was manufactured, produced and transported to this locality of Gare. It's like a small village in a not very prosperous part of Hungary. And then liberalization and neoliberal economy even worsened the conditions in her analysis. And then this was followed by, for example, Stephen Brain in 2011, who developed the concept of Stalinist environmentalism. And here's a quote. If environmentalism is defined as the political and philosophical program that seeks to impose limits on human activity so as to preserve the integrity of the environment, then the Soviet Union did indeed pursue environmentalism. Very controversial. Right now we don't have to do anything with it, but this definitely opened up Pandora's box. And there is an ongoing discussion. I didn't list all the researchers who are working with this topic, but the list could go on and on. I particularly like Birgitte's work. It's very nuanced, very beautifully written work, nuanced research on Soviet paper reuse. So, is there a 1.5 wave of environmentalism? Something that in between? Okay, this is a little bit generalizing, but could we perhaps come up with the notion or suggest the notion of Soviet environmentalism? It seems yes. So when you read works of Soviet and also East Central European scientists' works, they propose that human-nature interactions were part of, these are all theoretical works, so just to make sure that we are on the same page. They are theoretical works about hydrology, soil, landscape planning. That the human-nature interactions were part of the same integral and complex system. They may not be fully understood by humans. Yet, socialist science should have aimed to research and interpret these laws of nature as well as possible. This Soviet or scientist environmentalism aimed to gather understanding on nature and then aimed to assemble a complex plan to manage that interaction between humans and the environment. As opposed to Western environmentalism, this Soviet environmentalism, this is the 60s, so post-Stalinism, mostly looked for, not for solutions like a pollution levy fee or discharge permit systems, but more holistic. And holistic is wonderful, it can mean so many things, right? But a more holistic approach that to find a theoretical equilibrium between natural systems and human societies. When you read these Soviet thinkers and also their followers in East Central Europe, you find this beautiful language that's very loose in a way, it can mean so many things, but it's very beautiful language how to position socialist society differently than in the West, and also in a constant dialogue and a constant aiming for synergy with the non-human. What is the meaning of this in reality? So we could use waste and recycling as sort of a laboratory to test what happened on the ground. There are all these beautiful ideas that I didn't elaborate. This is all published work, so if you want to know more, there is a list of publications at the end, and you can hit some of those articles if you want to go deeper in these topics. But let's see the topic of our talk today, waste and recycling in communist Hungary. Before we get there, it's worth to mention the Soviet experience. By the 1930s, the USSR set up a centralized network of collect and recycling units. There is some ongoing research on this. So we have a colleague now in Berlin, Tatjana Perga, who is doing a lot of work on that. And there is also growing research here in Giessen. So we will know more about this specific topic in hopefully a few years. In the Stakhanovite-style recycling competition of post-consumer waste, the fulfillment of the quota was honored by monetary bonuses, and not fulfilling the quota was received fines. After the Sovietization of Eastern Europe, communist governments aimed to man material shortages by copying the Soviet example, but it was a different mode of recycling. So here's one example. As you see, bulky materials, metal, very easy to recycle and very easy to then reconvert into new steel for building up the socialist economy. It's being transported. It's 9th district, Budapest, a very fancy area now. If you want to have craft beer, it's a good location, but it's before that. So yeah, and Wafem was a company supervised by the Ministry of Heavy Industry. Ministry of Heavy Industry is the most important ministry in the setup. And this is not post-consumer waste, this is post-industrial waste most of the time, but there is also some post-consumer sections. It's a combination of both, but they were not catering for the consumers. For the consumers, it was a different company that I will talk more a little bit in a few minutes. In the 1950s, several state-owned companies were set up as branches of different ministries. For example, there were like really old firms like the wool collecting company, which was responsible for shredded wool to collect from private estates and state farms. They were paying people to do that. I mean, paying not much, but still. And there was the Ministry of Heavy Industry I talked about, and the Ministry of Light Industry. That was a big competition, and they were positioning themselves as the ideal collector of post-consumer and post-industrial waste. It was the Secondary Material of Waste Collection Trust. So the acronym MEH is the little insect, bee in Hungarian. So you're thrifty, you're flying around, and you're collecting post-consumer waste. That was kind of like the notion of this company, and having an acronym that's so telling. And the bee company, as you see, they had locations very close to the consumers. These are inner city collection points in Budapest, collecting paper, mostly traditional material, paper, cardboard, glasses, bottles, of course metal, used electronic appliances, and so forth. But this competition was not going very well on the ground. So it was like, again, a theory of having the perfect plan, of having the perfectly planned economy, of catering to society and building up this wonderful new economy. But there were hundreds of complaint letters that were like flooding the authorities who were complaining about the competing activities of companies. So, for example, there was this person, István Magyar, who was promoting May activities in the Szolnok area. It's about 100 kilometers from Budapest. And this man was complaining for having a wool collection company in the area that was active for 2 months of a year, and then people stayed on payroll for the entire year. What a waste of resources. This is not going to lead us to communist heaven, right? And letters like this, like long complaint letters, co-signed by the local political representatives, were received by the National Plan Office, the Ministry of Light Industry, the Ministry of Heavy Industry. And this is part of this letter, but translated. It is also not indifferent that we can ensure the social welfare of our workers. At the moment, this situation is not satisfactory in any of the company's premises. There are no adequate washrooms, changing rooms, or dining areas, and the culture hall is an unknown concept. Because of the temporary nature of recycling work, the standard working hours are few. Because of this, the earnings are low, and the workers are dissatisfied. Because of the above, labor emigration is high. So there is an attempt within the industry, the recycling industry of socialist Hungary, to make the profession more professional, to make it more effective, to make it more desirable, to provide a dignified working conditions for recycling workers. This would have been a stark opposition of the interwar context when children and families were picking waste in central waste collection landfills. And this B company promised to deliver so. Yes, there were material shortages, there was criticism of multiplicities, but the prominent functionaries behind May, as some of the MPs, for example, Géza Gazda, who was sort of like a communist celebrity, also named in Zsuzsa Gilles' book, because he had his own Stakhanovite style nationwide scrap collection movement. How many of you know people who have their own scrap collection movement? I don't know anyone, but Géza had one, and he visited the Rosa Luxemburg weaving mill in Kiev, and he saw a wonderfully set up industrial symbiosis system. All the byproducts, so the waste materials, were transported to somewhere. I'm not sure Géza saw where, but anyway, he believed that it was a wonderfully designed system. And then this is exactly that Soviet-Ukrainian example, and maybe I should tell this to my colleague Tatiana, who works on Soviet Ukraine, that has to be adopted in Hungary, and the May Collection Company will just deliver that. But the reality, that was no good. So this is an example from, it's a radio program, Radio Free Europe, but I think it encompasses, it summarizes the very notion of criticism within the country with the waste recycling system in the 50s. This is a comedy, it's like stand-up comedy kind of, transcript from Radio Free Europe. So this is not National Radio of Hungary. Dear House of Representatives, the May Company held the Iron Collection campaign this year as well, despite all our protest. The collection campaign already has many victims. Our well-known monuments suffered from the damage. We read that the diligent collectors took the 2 artistic bronze gates of the fence surrounding the statue of King Saint Stephen at the Fisherman's Bastion. They stole the antique knocks of historic houses in the Buda Castle district and sewed off the tail of the horse of the statue of Saint George. Instead of that, they should have sawed the statue of Stalin off. Alas, it's too late. Khrushchev already sawed it. So this encompasses the star criticism that there is the idea, there's the good theory, the wonderful theory of making a the system based on social equity, social and natural equity. And then there is some managerial ideas how to do it on the ground, and then there is the reality based on the computing capacities of the regime. So it's like brand ideas, something like I would encompass it, great ideas, very lousy Commodore 64, not really going through the software. There you go, that's your result. But consumption patterns were changing in the 1950s and 1960s. This gentleman is János Kádár, who was leading Hungary to a bright future, surrounded by sausage and goulash. And after the failed revolution, Kádár realized that Hungary was not a very good land for communism because of its history and social structure. There were very few people who were interested in the ideology. So it has to be done in a different way, and everyone likes to eat well, right? Everyone likes to have a good dinner. So that was János Kádár's pitch, and it worked quite well. First, the annual GDP growth was about 5% in the late 50s, and then 60s still 4%. So that's more than the UK at the time. Okay, it's not exactly West Germany, but it's pretty close. Despite reforms, recycling faced new challenges because more salami meant also more waste. So the consumption per capita sharply increased after the revolution of 56. And for example, the volume of paper rose from 50,000 to 80,000 tons just in 6 years' time, so almost doubled. And much of that paper was used by the packaging industries because Hungary is producing a lot of canned food, also for Western partners, but for the Soviet bloc. But they didn't have the paper to package all that canned food, so they had to import much of it from other lands. So this reformed waste economy also started to use new products, like these wonderful individually wrapped communist candies. This says Cocoa Bonbon, and this is Bear, Mozzie, Amigo, probably there's coffee, and this is Monkey, like monkey, and English Drops, and it says Drops. It's a funny one. I didn't notice that before. Anyway, new products, and you see the plastic material for wrapping and also for the packaging. This creates a whole new set of problems because this old school system that was already struggling, was already facing criticism, was doing well with the metal. Like metal was handled quite efficiently, and so it was also valuable, so it made sense. Paper, much of it was surprisingly large amounts based on low-level documents where you don't have much of this agency of trying to prove something, trying to prove a point. Yes, we are much better than the West. Even the low-level documents reveal much of, what was going on the ground. So paper, metal, and glass bottles that were recycled not as glass chips, but like glass bottles as whole. They were efficiently managed somehow. But the system struggled with the new materials, plastic wrapping, plastic bags, plastic milk bags. Luckily, aluminum cans and plastic bottles were not introduced in socialist Hungary. Okay.
They had an internet problem.
Okay. Sorry, guys, on the internet. So this new set of materials created new problems for the industry and also for recycling. And at the meantime, the consumption of traditional materials also sped up. So this is the socialist cornucopia that the Hungarians imagined in the 60s. You see a vast row of Czech beer and fake Hungarian wine in the middle. And then you have the self-service supermarkets. It's all great. It's all beautiful, right? There's a lot of abundance, a lot of food, and this is also what I remember in the 80s. So much food. I think they tried to kill me in school Like, just eat more. We shovel you more food. Victor, you will grow big. And then the waste crisis is waste crisis in the late 60s. This is exactly the result that the new system created. Because all these materials, when they entered the waste stream opened up. And then there was a problem with already existing landfills. Those landfills, some of them were phased out. So the central landfill in Budapest had to be phased out because it was so close to the new developments of the socialist periphery of the cities. But then they realized that they didn't have a landfill and they didn't have the technology to immediately start to incinerate all that waste that was produced. So these temporary landfills were used, and they had capacity for a few years, like clay mines, random quarries, anything and everything around and within the city limits. So the plan was working like that in real life. There were some plans to introduce waste sorting, and in 1981, a comprehensive recycling plan was drawn up for the city. There were different stakeholders. So it was the city, it was the company responsible for waste collection and management, and it was also research institutes that they wanted to immediately introduce sorting with new housing developments in '84, and also introduce sorting with housing developments that already operated when seasonal reconstruction or upgrading was due. But of course, this was the 1980s, so very little funds were available. And at the meantime, the annual volume of municipal waste in Budapest was just exponentially growing, as you see from between the 1950s. It's a tenfold growth million cubic meters. Yes, population was also growing, but not with this speed. So you can take it without a pinch of salt, about a tenfold growth of municipal waste growth in Budapest. And this is the composition of waste that you see in the city. What is interesting here, and it would be very different in the West, it's very different in the Vienna context. So plastics, as you see, they are stagnating throughout the period between 75 and 89. It can be also connected with the capabilities of the regime. The regime doesn't have access to that much of new technology, that cannot introduce new systems, which is good. Which is good because there's less plastics in the system, they stagnate. And then metal is growing, doubled during the time, and the glasses are growing as well. And then, yeah, these are the three main branches. The secret weapon was thus not technology and not delivering results in this context, but it was ideology. And it was blending the somewhat rigid, somewhat out of the blue, like a little bit quirky and holistic Soviet environmentalist ideas of this equilibrium, living together with the nature, and then massively industrializing like crazy, opening new mines and industrial plants. You know, these are like a little bit bipolar statements. So somehow reconcile that dichotomy with influences from Western environmentalism, from the works of Rachel Carson and other thinkers who were critics of the Western capitalist system. That could be, who could be somehow incorporated in the socialist ideology. Rachel Carson was not necessarily on the right, on the left, aligned with the socialist, but her message was not immediately discovered, because the first reception messages, the first reviews of Rachel Carson's work is a woman, literally in the 60s, and a journalist. But she was a biologist, she was a scientist, right? Not a journalist. But it changes. They realize that they can utilize the message, and the perception changes, that by the early 1970s, late 1960s, it's before Stockholm, before 1972, there is a stark flip of using Rachel Carson and others to deliver the message of this new wave of socialist environmentalism. And Hungary develops its own Rachel Carson. Okay, Lajos was born in Czechoslovakia, so Hungary, a very interesting East Central European country, but manages to come up with a local version of Rachel Carson. And Lajos has been writing several works about popular works about the environment and the protection of the environment. So the one on the right is in the protection of our environment, domestic task and international cooperation. The second one is suicidal civilization, air and water pollution, destruction of arable land, and so forth. So the language becomes even more critical. It was already opened up in the 1960s. You see a lot of criticism, a lot of self-evaluation, realistic self-evaluation of problems within the press, within the scientific discourse, within ministry documents. But the 1970s is a whole other level. It's like there is a very open discourse about these problems and seeking solutions that are unique to the system. But the irony is that as the system opens up to consumer impulses, opens up to more engagement with the global economy, opens up with more collaboration with Western European countries, then the recycling system struggles. There is less and less incentive for citizens to engage with this system, and there is less and less overall resources available. At the same time, you see some sort of a genuine struggle to come up with research projects on circular research funding. For example, this wonderful research project, the most favorable design of the human macro and micro environment by the National Research Plan in 76 and 80. Yes, there is inflation, but you see the budget doubles within just 10 years. So from one planning period to another planning period. And what does it mean, these numbers? One Lada 1500, very good car, was 100K forints in the early 1980s. So this is, you can do the math. This is several hundreds of vehicles that were channeled into the research activity. And at the meantime, the National Front is being instructed to incorporate environmental activism as one of their research, one of their activities, one of their key activities. So it's the early 1970s when the Patriotic People's Front is starting to do these activities, and it's very funny to see that they don't know what to do in the beginning. So they had no idea what is this environment and how to do this and what can we do. Plant trees? Like, we cannot plant trees all the time. We should do something different. And then they start to circulate best practices and come up with wonderful and actually meaningful new activities for children, for school-age adults, and for also for school-age students, and also for adults to serve the cause of environmental activism. And what is interesting in these documents is the emotionally charged propaganda. So they're using that old school communist language, very militant in a way, but now it's for the improvement of the environmental conditions. It's a wonderful synergy of two separate things. And these programs involve a lot of people, millions of people every month. Just to give you one example, one project to improve the living environment in a Budapest neighborhood involved 170,000 families in 58 socialist housing estates for various purposes. And they organize national tree planting campaigns and a lot of communal activities. One of the few last slides now. And also education becomes an important tool for the 1980s when the system is running out of gasoline, and children are being utilized in a more intensive manner as targets of the new environmentalist propaganda in Hungary. Oh, sorry. So recycling paper, recycling different materials is a fun activity for children. It is advertised as something that is a great pastime. It's a great leisure time without adult supervision, meeting new interesting residents of the local area, especially this gentleman, I think is from the Smurfs, maybe, and alligators. So wonderful new experience for school-age children, very appropriate pastime. But it's a communal experience, is to raise a new cohort, a new generation of good socialist citizens who are not only cautious about building a socialism in this country that's falling apart, but they are also conscious about their environment, and they are ready to improve environmental conditions by collecting paper waste in a plastic bag that says BASF. It's an irony there. So, last slide. My suggestions. Human nature coexistence has been proposed by a socialist environmentalism, this quirky mixture, patchwork of ideology, but without substantial success on the practical level, maintaining more or less a paternalist human nature dichotomy. Gradual change in consumption and production patterns, as observed in the 60s, 70s, contributed to an effective adoption of some Western environmentalist ideas that reinforced this human nature dichotomy ironically. During the gradual change of environmental discourses, the key role of propaganda education remained. I think it's a so if there was one level, one field that the socialist system was very effective, it was this, spreading the mind virus of environmentalism, especially with school-aged children. Yes, but the dualism between the desired and the real, it remained, and the gap remained very wide. These are the sources that can be used. I'm very happy to share, and many of these articles are open access, so feel free to drop me an email, and thank you very much for your attention.